All right, let's go ahead and get things started. Welcome everyone again to another round of FOIA Friday, a community podcast about all things public records. I'm Dylan Bergen. I'm a data reporter at Muckrock, and today I'm joined by Kay and Ileana from the Trans Journalists Association. Do you two want to take a second to introduce yourselves?
Hello. I am a data and graphics reporter with Civic News Company as my day job, and then I also am co-executive director at the Trans Journalists Association, where I help coordinate a few sort of coverage-focused programs, including our project with Muckrock. And I will hand it over to Ileana.
Hi, I'm a digital editor with Roads and Bridges magazine. And in my free time, I'm a resource assistant here at TGA, and I work specifically on this project we're about to talk about.
Cool. So I'm just gonna dig right into the notes that I'm sending in the chat. For you, all of you that have not joined before, I quickly go through some notes that are just a bunch of links, and I'll share those in the chat, or have been sharing them in the chat. And those have some updates on different projects, and then we'll come back to Kay and Ileana and start talking about their project tracking anti-trans executive orders, and how those are or are not being enforced across the country. So, without further ado, um, here's what we got on the agenda for today. I just wanted to share a few updates about the Data Liberation Project. If you're not familiar, the Data Liberation Project is a project now stewarded by Muckrock and Big Local News. The goal is to find, request, and clean data sets that are useful to folks across the country on lots of different topics. You can see here we have everything from federal inmate deaths to boating accident reports database. And yeah, we make those public, clean them up, and try to document them the best that we can. A lot of volunteers helped in the last couple of weeks as we've gotten police disciplinary files back, and we're reviewing them. So shout out to everyone who helped examine and review different files we got back. They were looking at categorizing those by the types of files they were, and just pointing out anything that stood out about the different incidents in the files. Um, what else do we have here? Um, we recently published a story on Muckrock about disappearing reports from the USDDA website. Um, if you go here, you can read a little bit more, but basically these reports were reported missing to us through this uh, form down here at the bottom, where we're asking people to let us know if they have seen any data sets that are removed so we can request some more communications and documents about what happened and why. In this case, we found out what a lot of people may be expecting in these sorts of scenarios, that they were removed, as this staffer wrote, for an abundance of caution, as to not promote work that contradicts the administration's policies. So if you're interested in things like that, in terms of preserving data or know any data that disappeared that you want to know more about how that happened or why that happened, hit us up in this forum. Um, on the horizon, we have Document Cloud office hours coming up on July 11th. If you're a Document Cloud user and have any questions or ideas you want to talk over with the developers of Document Cloud, they'll be on that call. And then we have our question of the day for this FOIA Friday. This one has come in a few different ways over the last couple months. Folks have been asking me what sort of documents you can request from ICE on arrest details, or detainment details. One thing I wanted to share was this guide to obtaining detention records from the American Immigration Council. Don't know why this is not loading right now. Uh, but I promise at that link there is a useful guide and PDF that goes through different types of oversight documents, records about conditions, detention files, and different things you can request. I think that guide is kind of written from the first person or family requester kind of community focus, but I think those are just as good for anyone who's not in that category. Um, and then I wanted to share a nationwide individual level ICE data set that was just published this week that I think is really awesome, and you should check out. And I have Chloe Dennison on the call who's going to talk about some requests that American Oversight has filed.
Yeah, it's so great to be here. So my name is Chloe Dennison, and I am a researcher at American Oversight, leading the research team's work on immigration and also elections. And so I can share in the chat two different compilations we have of our recent requests on immigration work, and then also just our larger compilation of every request we've sent out since the election. And we have really been focusing on immigration specifically in the recent weeks and months on sort of uncovering more information about how 287G programs have been operating and also other, more non-traditional methods of federal immigration enforcement, including, other agencies at DOJ that are now tasked with immigration enforcement and other states that have become increasingly involved with it. So that's sort of where our investigations on immigration have been headed. We've also been doing quite a bit of work on things like third country removals, including those to El Salvador, but also South Sudan, in light of the Supreme Court decision last week. And so I just wanted to share these resources here. If there are any records requests that we've sent out that are of particular interest to you or your group, please let me know, and we're happy to share those records with you directly and provide you with any updates on whether we plan to litigate them. And at the top of both of these documents, we also have a form where if you have ideas for us to submit records requests, we're more than happy to do those on your behalf. So yeah, I will put my email in the chat, but please let me know if there's anything AO can do to support any of your work. So yeah, thank you.
Cool. And it sounds like we'll have someone from American Oversight coming to talk to us either in July or later in the summer about more of this kind of work that they're doing, requesting different types of documents from ICE or other immigration authorities. So cool. Without further ado, let's get to talking with Kay and Ileana. The first thing I want to ask you all is how this project began. This project to track anti-trans executive orders and how they're being enforced. Where did this project come from?
Um, I basically was just reading through the orders and started to notice that a lot of them had requirements like file this report in 90 days, or we'll publish this in 90 days, or um, you know, write up XYZ report and send it into the Department of Education. And so, as a data reporter, those are always cues that some sort of public record is going to be created and have to pass through some sort of system that we can FOIA. So once I started noticing that pattern in the orders, I wanted to ask the question of, how much of this is actually happening, especially because the executive orders aren't law. But they're strongly encouraged. So it's interesting either way, whether or not these documents are being produced, passed along, if that's happening on time, if it's not happening on a time, if there isn't a deadline, what's going on with that. So wanted to start tracking some of that and just started reaching out to various journalism slacks and seeing who was already working in this area and interested in preserving records around it. So
Did you have an inkling of the scope of the project at that point? Did you know, like, you filed over 250 requests at this point? Did you two know that you were getting yourselves into something that big?
I think we had a sense that we probably wouldn't hear back from the federal government on a lot of this and that we would have to go to the states.
Mhm.
So, each request that we might want to file ends up being 50 states. So I think like in that sense, I at least was like, we're probably gonna have to do a bunch of local FOIAs to get anything out of anybody. But I think I at least was surprised that we were able to file that many that quickly. Ileana, I don't know. As the person filing and sending out the FOIAs, what is your sense of that?
Honestly, seeing the amount of anti-trans, even just federal action, after this January, I expected we're going to be filing a good amount, and there's going to be stories and more leads coming out. Um, so honestly, not very surprised.
And then you started breaking these up into categories, or how were you tracking the different orders or responses or different things that you knew you wanted to follow up on?
Yeah, the best way we track it is we have a Google form, and I'm gonna drop that link in the chat. And that anyone, please feel free if you see something that is connected to whether it's federal anti-trans orders or it's maybe states' responses to federal anti-trans action. We did some crowdsourcing, asking people, "Hey, send us your ideas." At this point, suggestions are would be great because it is mostly now just me and Kay. Kay will email me something and say, "Hey, this happened. Have we requested it?" Or I'll see a headline and think, "Oh, let's request about that."
And are you still going in that kind of ad hoc way of just like seeing things as they come up and requesting it? Or do you have kind of, I don't know, other buckets of things that you're interested in and kind of actively doing research on to try to get more documents about?
I think it's a bit of both. We're still keeping up with the news, of course, but we have areas, we've done a lot of requests in health and education spaces. So we're looking at some other spaces, arts, like museums. I know Kay has spoken about, interested in business side of things. And things have come up from the records we've gotten back. One of the records we got back from a California Department of Education that actually prompted our first wave of asking each state for something.
Can you tell me more about that request or that or the order that spurred that as well?
Yeah. So that request is this Department of Education's Student Privacy Policy Office sent a letter to all states. Um, they call them SEAs, and it's like state education agencies. They sent all these different states a letter basically saying, "Hey, we're really worried about parents' rights in an anti-trans way, and how that connects with FERPA. So we're asking for all your FERPA compliance documents." And that's one of our most fruitful requests. All the states are sending their responses back to us, which is great. And most of them are pretty standard. The states are saying, "Yeah, we follow FERPA. It's a federal law." Um, I don't know what you were expecting, but yeah,
And then what are some of the kind of other things you're tracking in the area of education?
we have a lot going on in education, which probably isn't surprising. So, state level, we have those FERPA responses, but federal level, there's the Title IX Special Investigations Team that got launched. We requested records about that. There's different they shut down the Department of Education um, hotline where people were saying like, "Oh, this school is teaching gender." They shut down that hotline, but we had requested responses, and then we also requested records about the shutdown because we're interested in seeing that as well.
Have you got those back? That is really interesting.
No, we have gotten nothing back from the federal government.
All the most interesting requests were like waiting for the federal government to send us something, and we're sort of like, don't know if
Please.
it's gonna happen.
Are you
Yeah.
getting just like extremely long estimated fulfillment dates from the federal government at this point? Yeah.
Yes. It's long fulfillment dates, or it's we're acknowledging your request and we're not giving you an estimation. We've seen it, so sit tight.
Are you then taking some of these requests and then bringing them down to the state level? If you know, like for sure, we're not going to get this from the federal government, let's try to take it down to the states and see what they're doing and maybe having more success.
Honestly, the the majority of records we've requested from the federal government in the education space, a good chunk of those states aren't going to have. It's just within the U.S. Department of Education. But when we do have the chance, we do try to take it down to the state level. Unfortunately, this was just in one case with DC, but sometimes the state education agencies don't want to give us their records and they say, "Oh, go ask the feds." And in that case, I'm like, "Please don't make me go to the feds."
And let's talk about like how this is all logistically working. Like, what's the process then for tracking these once you have, say, filed to 50 different states for the same request, and that's part of, hundreds of other requests that you're tracking at the moment.
Yeah, we have a big, beautiful Excel sheet where I put in all the requests, and I'll also throw that link in the chat. People can look at, and if you're interested, see what are all the Department of Justice requests we've done, or what's all the things that's been completed that we got back. But yes, we have a giant Excel sheet where I put in the requests when I submit them, and then when I get updates, I'll update the status. And a couple records we've gotten kind of in a third party manner. They've just been emailed to me. So I'll also put links there.
And then are you following up with each of these FOIA officers, or are you in case splitting that? What does that look like? Because that, for me, when I do these sort of big projects, that's like always a thing that start very excited about. Like, oh, we're getting responses back, and then I'm quickly like, oh my gosh, there are a million different directions each of these requests can go, and they're all branching off into different worlds of problems for me.
I am mostly doing them, but I know Kay and other TJA members
I'm
are
I'm
there if I
paying
need help.
Ileana to do them, so I don't
Yes,
have
I'm getting paid to do
Not,
this,
not that
so
I
I
meant to
enjoy
call you
all
out,
of
Kay.
yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think we're gonna have some conversations around what sort of like appeals and like follow-ups we may be doing, and especially going back and forth on like, okay, we filed X request, didn't get much back. Do we want to try three test requests with various states with new language to see if we might get something else? Some of that like planning stuff as well. We're working through.
Yeah.
exactly. And fortunately, we haven't gotten that many rejections.
Yeah, you just have the long estimated fulfillment dates, the long projections for the federal government, but the states have been pretty responsive, it sounds like.
Yes.
And are you going to state level agencies, or are you going all the way down to like county or district level agencies for different health and education type of requests?
So far, I've just done state level, with the exception of we requested every state's Department of Corrections policies for transgender inmates, and um, New Jersey does it a little bit interesting. I requested it, and they said, "Yeah, here's our everything non-health policy," and they said, "Hey, Rutgers University does the health policy, like that, the healthcare." So I went to Rutgers, and I did get the policies back on that, but mostly it is just state level agencies.
Hmm.
I
Is there
think
anything else in terms of the process or kind of day-to-day logistics of this big of a project that you feel like you've learned since the outset?
I've learned it's a big waiting game, both on that federal level, but also states. They do take a little bit of time, but they are quite responsive, which is nice. And we don't get too many requests for like, oh, we need 10 more days. But it is a waiting game, both to get the records and to see what records to get next. It both feels like there's so much news happening at once, but also sometimes I feel like I'm sitting around and waiting for another record to get suggested. So if you ever have one, fill out our Google form.
I think the other thing is like one thing we've been seeing with these is that the non-responses or the lack of records in this instance are just as potentially interesting as stories. In terms of, I've been doing a lot of the outreach to publications that are interested in this sort of work or might, be on a beat and interested in specific records or interested in following up and doing some of that, maybe county or local level work based on something kind of weird or particular to a specific state. And one thing that we have, heard is there is a bit of interest in the fact that like, oh, the attorneys generals of each state are supposed to be, for instance, coordinating with the federal government on some of these education policy changes required by the big executive order that pertains to K-12 education. And that there are no records related to that sort of coordination happening. So that, that obviously raises the question, well, is the coordination not happening? Maybe it isn't that they're creating records, but like as far as we can tell, it may be that that coordination is not happening. So that's, something that I pointed out to a couple of newsrooms that I thought might be interested in it. Because I do think when you have something like these executive orders where the compliance is not technically mandatory, or it's kind of gray legal in terms of what exactly are people are supposed to be doing? How are we interpreting it? When we did see in Indiana some state level legislation, a law that requires similar actions that are sort of dictated in some of these executive orders. Um, we we were seeing, a couple of years ago when that law passed, that a lot of the districts implemented it in different ways or didn't know how to implement it because the guidance wasn't clear. And that led to a series of stories. So the thought with some of these executive orders also is that sort of like lack of clarity, lack of guidance, lack of sort of explicit mandate may lead to some interesting stories about how these are or are not shaking out, and how that not shaking out may in fact be interesting in and of itself as a potential avenue for coverage. So
Yeah.
The lack of a due date has really stuck out. Where, yeah, that example Kay mentioned, they never said by blank you need to do this. While some other things, reports that have been mentioned in executive orders, we haven't gotten those back, but we don't have these records. So I would like to think that those exist.
And what exactly were the orders for schools that you're mentioning in Indiana?
so one thing, I guess, to back up a little bit, one thing that is happening with a number of the federal orders, especially related to sort of gender, and particularly trans people, is that a lot of it is patterned on either like very local or uh, either very local policy or state legislation that has already passed in some places. So, for example, with Indiana, the law I was referencing is a pronoun notification law. So it's sort of the idea that if a kid changes their name or changes their gender, or asks teachers to refer to them with different pronouns, etc., that the districts are obligated to contact the parents about it. And so that's one of the things that the federal government, I don't believe that was in an executive order specifically. I think it was in a memo. But a lot of what we're seeing sort of at the federal level has these state precedents, or for example, it's not statewide in Texas, but there was a district in Texas, Katy ISD, that had a similar policy to that Indiana policy. And so like we have 2 years of sort of runway of like, how was this implemented when a specific district or specific state required it? Now that the feds are saying schools should be doing this, what does that start to look like? And like the thing that we did see in Indiana is some districts were like, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to abide by it really closely. And the letter of the law says that if Nicholas changes his name to Nick, I have to notify the parents about that. So a bunch of parents were like super annoyed that they were getting notices about their kids changing their nicknames every like third month and things like that, versus other districts were sort of treating it as we're only going to notify the parents if the kid has asked for a gender identity transition plan, which is a sort of a specific document. And other districts chose not to implement it at all because there was a line in the law that sort of said this shouldn't be perceived as or interpreted to in a way that violates the federal data privacy laws. And so some districts were sort of like, well, we think that notifying the parents would actually violate the federal privacy laws in this instance. So there was just a huge range of implementation, in part because the state refused to give specific guidance about how to interpret the law in that instance. So when you're looking over to these executive orders that have um, pieces of ideas or policies that have sort of already existed, um, and may have played out in a specific way. But again, like there's not like an outline for here is how to do this. A lot of them asks the states to come up with, well, here's how we're going to do it and send it to the feds for review. And so, when you're running into sort of implementation questions like that, it creates a lot of administrative fuzziness, which is for sure a little wonky, a little like policy heavy, but it does raise a lot of potentially, I think, interesting reporting questions about what people are doing with this sort of ambiguity. Um,
Yeah, and I think adds a lot of nuance beyond just the orders and how many of them are coming out and what exactly they're aiming to do versus whether or not it's really possible for different agencies to comply, or they whether they will or not. And it sounds like in Indiana there were some school districts that didn't. Is that what you're saying? And did they respond just with no responsive documents, or how did you understand that they weren't that they had interpreted the law to mean that they might be breaking federal law by abiding by the new order?
so in this particular instance, this was a story that I had done sort of a year prior, so it's not directly tied to the executive orders in the sense that like it way precluded all of this work. But to suss that out, I did a series of FOIAs of the specific districts that were basically like, what's your guidance for implementing this? And then send me aggregates of how many of these notices that you've sent out. And so we got some very panicked calls from districts about that. And one district actually doxed their students because they did not properly redact the names from the spreadsheet they sent me, all sorts of things like that. So, like, I was doing that story in 2024, I think, because the law occurred in 2023, where we sort of were able to do that FOIA work at the local level, and that sort of local work where we've seen the state struggling to interpret this stuff even at a much more direct uh, government connection where they can go there to their own state department of education and be like, what am I supposed to do? And so that part of that and like that sort of more local reporting from last 2020, late 2023, early 2024 has been informing how we've been thinking about what sort of public records might be created and what sort of things might be worth following with these executive orders. I think the main thing there is just that there's like all of these executive orders have some sort of like local germ or local precedence or some sort of legislation was already proposed in at least one state, if not passed, related to these executive orders. And so like we can sort of trace that sort of policy connection between them to see, the things that may have happened locally already that may have already been covered might also lead to new stories as they're trying to expand similar policies federally in a less technical manner or a less like formalized manner than a state law. So
Yeah, and looking for the ways it sounds like that these laws actually aren't having any effect on what they're enacted to do or ordered to do.
right. And like I think, in the education realm, and I'm just gonna keep harping on education because that's sort of my day job is a lot of K-12 work is like, we see all these orders coming out at the federal level that are like you should do X policy or you should review X laws, and like it raises all these questions that have been points of tension in these districts for years already, as there have been sort of conversations around curriculum and conversations around pronoun notifications and all those sorts of things. So I think um, the connection there and the ways that they sort of pass back and forth is pretty can be pretty interesting. And I hope more people spin off of the what's going on with the executive orders and what we're getting back and sort of go, oh, there might be something local here to dig into.
Speaking of which, do you have any specific requests that have come back, documents that are you think are most important or threads that are most important to follow? Just for anyone on this call, whether they're a journalist or not, you would say like, go look at that. That kind of gets to the heart of what we're trying to do here and what we hope to find.
For me, I think some of the most interesting stuff that has come back is the Departments of Corrections records, because you've seen some departments that have already revised their policies based on federal conversations. And you've seen other departments that have said, we're not revising these policies, we haven't revised them in years, and we don't have plans to revise them. And so I think that's very interesting because that's one of the policy areas that is, actively changing in many states. And that sort of cross-state difference is really interesting. Ileana, do you have anything else that stood out to you?
Uh, to go back to the state education agencies, they're responding to the feds and saying, yes, we follow FERPA. Um, it on first glance, the records they look pretty basic. Again, the states are saying we follow FERPA. Here's the related policies. But if you go in and look at what the states are saying then to teachers about it, we got a bunch of records back from California, and they've been very vocal, telling teachers, telling superintendents, yes, we follow FERPA, and acknowledging that this was kind of pushed by an anti-trans interest. Looks like some other states just responded very broadly, yes, we follow FERPA, and didn't really reach out then to the educators in their state to try to just clear up. This is what we feel about telling a parent their child wants to change their pronouns or their name. But California, which is not surprising considering California, but they it had a response to the records that was very interesting and unique.
So you got back both the documents that California was sending to the state and different like communications, it sounds like, from local.
Yes, yeah, California then sent also, they were like, here's our response to the feds, but here's also letters then the California Department of Education sent out to superintendents and other educational leaders. And even after we got that request back, if you just go to the California Department of Education, they have a great page where it's like, this is I forget exactly what it's called, but basically here's records that we're making public, and they've had more follow up that they've sent to educators about this specific letter that the Fed sent.
And when you get those back, like, are you reviewing those all individually? Are you sending those out to reporters? How do you find that in the documents that you got back?
I would say we're both looking at them. I'm looking at them to make sure like these records are correct. But then Kay has really been the lead on, okay, this is a reporter that they think would be like good to send this to.
Yeah, I've just been doing outreach to beat reporters because I think the thing with some of these records, especially some of the emails, we've gotten some really interesting emails that we were not expecting as from from California on the Department of Ed stuff, but also some of the corrections departments sent us some pretty interesting emails. So I've sort of been reaching out to, reporters, particularly beat reporters, who have a track record of covering trans communities and being interested in the particular policy area and saying, hey, keep an eye on these. We've got these coming back, and just making sure that they're aware that it's a resource. I think some of these hopefully will lead to, immediate stories, but a lot of it is also just useful for tracking the change over time, right? Like, a lot of what these executive orders are doing is trying to prompt a policy change at the state level, or prompt, some sort of uh revision to how things are being done, right? And so even if we get something and it's like, oh, nothing has changed for 2 years, that's a useful checkpoint where if somebody's digging in 6 months from now, or if we file another FOIA 6 months from now and we see that there have been revisions to those policies responsive to what's going on federally, we now have, the before and the after, and sort of a flag that, oh, something has changed here, and that may be, worth the story. And then part of it is also like it's just useful, like a useful repository of where some of the baselines are on this stuff, um, as we're collecting the records. So I've sort of, flagged a couple people who cover the the prison system sort of broadly, and sort of said, hey, like, you should check these out. Like, even if you're not doing something, or there's not something specifically changing, this is a really useful repository of like what these policies look like across states, and that sort of thing. So
Yeah, I guess that kind of leads into the question, where does the project go from here? And it sounds like what you're aiming for is to be that kind of continuity over time, to say like when we requested this in June of 2025, this was their response, but now you can see if it's July of 2026, different iterations maybe, or different points where they made different decisions about whether to follow an order or not.
Yeah, and I think hopefully being able to chase some news items as well, as we see more of these um changes at the local level becoming controversial or sort of rising to attention in the news, we can go back and be like, do we have the relevant record that from this state related to how they're implementing this? Or did they said that they didn't have any sort of records on their plans for implementing this. Let's refoia it because it's now a point of controversy in X state. So I think being able to sort of build a baseline, but then also, yeah, exactly, like react and keep an eye on how these stories are developing and what new FOIAs that might prompt can be hopefully really helpful. And obviously the end goal or the dream is that it is going to inform folks' stories as well.
Ileana, you look like you're about to jump in and say something.
Yeah, I would also just say a smaller part is I think it's important. I'd like to think that we're serving a little bit of an archive as well. One of our first requests were some of those pages that were being taken off the CDC website and the HHS website. Um, and so I do like the thought of where keeping some of these resources or just these records somewhere on the internet alive. We've also requested a couple drafts of things, and I think that's also important to have it out there that yes, there's already been reporting that this thing has happened, specifically for the HHS budget draft. They are going to make those changes. They're getting rid of the LGBTQ plus youth 988 suicide hotline services, but let's go back and see when this started and when this was just like the beginning of the conversation too.
Hmm. Have you done many of those types of requests where you found something that you know is happening and it's not so much about how it's being enforced now, but where that came from?
We have done a couple, definitely. We also have asked for a draft of the HHS report that was just a hot mess of trash against youth gender affirming care. Yeah.
And you got that back, it sounds like.
No, not yet, because that is a federal document and we are still
Uh,
waiting on the feds to give us anything, but I have hope that eventually we will get it.
got it. Um, Anything else you want to share with this group? Any other calls to action that you want to get in front of people?
I think the big thing is, as we've been talking about, some of our most interesting requests are stalled at the federal level, right? So, but like, I think if anyone has creative ideas on ways to sort of ways that those records might travel or might end up at state agencies, even if they're things that would traditionally mostly just be housed, at the federal level. Would love to hear those. Would love to hear your tactics for getting things that are like truly like federal documents, but that might have been, sent somewhere specific that might be more responsive. If you've had luck with that in the past, like tell us how you did it. A lot of the successful FOIAs here have been things that we reached out and chatted with folks who have done similar past work, or like they tested it in one state, it worked, they recommended it, and we expanded it and filed it with all 50 states, things like that. So some of those suggestions for those like clever workarounds and leads on like, oh, my state had this document or my school district had this document, maybe it's elsewhere too, have been really helpful. So if you have anything like that, or if you're interested in looking through our records and being like, oh, you tried filing for, X draft from Y agency, I bet this other Z agency might have interacted or sent some emails about that process. Any sort of suggestions or ideas like that would definitely be helpful, because I think we're going to have to start getting increasingly creative to get around some of the federal slowdowns. So
Ileana, anything from you?
Big ditto to that. Again, plugging that Google form. I would really just love to hear people's ideas, what you think we should be requesting for, did you see something even in your local level, maybe your town is adopting some kind of anti-trans policy, and it seems clearly connected to one of these federal actions. Just pop it in that Google form. Yes, interagency communications on requests. That is a great idea, Brian. And then if anyone has, like, you have a document that you're like, this is related to anti-trans action, we also would love to get that document.
Michelle, you asked the question that I was thinking as well. Do you name all the agencies then, or do you just say interagency communications of the sort of type of communications you're looking for? Brian, if you want to unmute yourself, or you can just type it in the chat. I'm interested in the answer to that question as well.
So I typically know there's usually the problem, you work backwards. There's always one agency that like never responds to requests and never gives you what you want. So you figure out who they have communication with and you go after their records. And then you ask for that interagency communication, because then when someone says, "Hey, we have no records," you're like, "I have an email you sent, you have records, like good luck trying to deny this. Like I have one, show me the rest of them." So that's how usually what I use this as a tool for.
And
Just
you
start with
know,
your worst and work around them.
That's
and you
really
know which agencies may also be involved just through like, I don't know, MOUs or other orders related to who else has to be involved in this thing.
Yeah, and sometimes you fire a really narrow, well, like say all interagency, but like restrict it down to like a one topic and a tight date range, and then you can figure out who they communicate with on this before, so don't get accused of doing a fishing expedition. Just interagency, but one topic, and then see what happens, and over 1 month or 3 months or something.
Awesome. Thanks for chiming in. I think this is a good time to open it up to questions. If anyone has questions for Kay and Ileana, you can drop them in the chat, or you can just go ahead and unmute yourself. I think we have a small enough call that hopefully we won't be fighting to talk over each other. While you think about your questions, or before you ask your question, I'm going to answer just one that came in from Kamala earlier. Kamala asked, "Could I ask what is the difference between Muckrock request and FOIA machine? When would I use one or the other? How does the follow-up work in each case?" That is a very good question. So Muckrock, our website right now, is both a combination of the editorial work that our editorial team is doing that I'm involved in, and the Muckrock filing platform where you can file requests. If you file a request on Muckrock right now, we have a support staff that helps make sure that request goes to the right place, puts it into a PDF or a form or a portal if the agency asks. Basically handles a lot of the logistics that would slow you down and stop you from just like filing a request and getting on with your day. And instead, you'd have to do all these kind of little administrative things, maybe even send snail mail. So that's what happens on Muckrock, the filing platform on Muckrock. We also took over something called FOIA Machine that is very similar, a place to file and track requests like on Muckrock. But what it doesn't have is our support staff doing those things for you on the back end. So the kind of premium features of our support staff working on things for you, and just the whole other suite of like things you can do with Muckrock in terms of sharing the requests, collaborating on requests, embargoing or cloning requests. Those are kind of things that you can do on Muckrock. The FOIA machine website right now hasn't been developed in a long time, but really it's just a way for you to track and file requests outside of your email and share them with others, but you don't have the support staff on the back end. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Oh, of course. While we wait for some more questions, I do have a question. Kate and Ileana, what has surprised you most in this work so far? Could be the lack of response, it could be a specific document, anything that just surprised you.
For me, it was the lack of response and the pretty universal, no responsive documents we got on a specific request. Kay had mentioned it. So, in the big executive order about K through 12 education, there's a section, and there's no due date with it, which is interesting, but saying the attorney general has to coordinate with state attorney generals by enforcing the law and filing appropriate actions against K through 12 teachers and school officials who violate the law. Um, by there's sexually exploiting minors, which is a duh and unrelated, but also unlawfully practicing medicine by offering diagnosis and treatments, and then unlawfully facilitating the social transition of a minor student. So those are some really interesting records that I would love to see, but the states are saying we aren't doing that coordination. We have no records of it yet. So that's really interesting because the question is, have they just not gotten to it? Have the feds not reached out? And is that because there was no due date on it? Or are they trying to be really sneaky about it and yeah, doing not making records of it or yeah.
Because I would like that's the sort of one where like if they were doing it, but we're trying to either be sneaky about it or uh were denying it. Um, I I would have expected like a different sort of denial than we got if there were in fact records. And so like and we've also had some like follow-up conversations about this to sort of like chase it down a little more. But I agree that's one of the ones that has been really interesting to me as well because like you would expect like well, we have some stuff but it's exempted for various reasons or we don't have that, etc. In with, you get the little cues that like you need to refine your request and that sort of thing. And these ones have really just been wholesale, like, nope, not a thing, not happening, sort of rejections, which is it also, yeah, has been kind of surprising. So that's one of the things I tipped like some LGBTQ investigative outlets to, and they're sort of like making some calls and digging into it to see like what is going on there because that's kind of interesting. So we'll see if it ends up, turning anything interesting up. But
In the chat, Brian McCarter asked, "What requests have you litigated?"
nothing yet. So I think that's sort of our next question, especially I think with some of the federal stuff that we may end up having more extensive issues with. I think we're going to be coordinating um, with folks to see, okay, so what sort of appeals should we do, or what, how should we chase these down?
Anything else before we wrap up and continue on our FOIA Friday? Hopefully you file some requests or respond to requests that you've been meaning to respond to. Nothing?
Um, I have a question if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
When it comes to following up with federal agencies, how frequent should we, how to make it efficient so we get the the information that we seek?
That is a good question. There are the federal timelines that specify when you should expect the agency to respond. You also have those at the state level, and generally try to stay pretty close to those and follow up at the specified time in which they're supposed to get to me, or a couple days before, just saying, "Hey, I expect a response by this time," or "Hey, wanted to check in on this," just to kind of preemptively nudge them. But Kay, Ileana, do you have any other kind of approaches?
For me, thankfully, Buckrock has it's set to every couple of weeks it'll send those messages automatically following up. And then besides that, I think the best thing if you haven't heard in a while is jumping on the phone or sending an email to the FOIA person at that department and asking what's the status of this record? Do you have a time estimate?
And Matthew asks really basic question, where can I learn to file these requests? I'm going to drop in the Muckrock uh, 101 page. That has a lot of links to other guides we've written or done, and I think there's a few other ones I can find here. Here's a page with a bunch of articles we've written over the years on all sorts of topics. Um, yeah, everything from what is a public record, what sort of fee categories to expect, to appeals and how to get a faster response. So that should have a lot of materials for you. Um, Callie asks, any suggestions on what to do if you can't reach a federal agency after the 20 to 30 day requirement? I think I would say, just like Ileana was saying, starting by calling or making other kind of good faith effort to show that you know the deadline and you've tried to ask them to comply with the law. Um, After that point, if they haven't responded or tried to extend the deadline, the next step is an administrative appeal. And then finally, if it has to be litigated or if they're really not complying with any sort of mediation, then you could approach an attorney, whether you're a journalist or not, and find out if there's any kind of specific ways forward that they see to getting this agency to comply. What I will say is that I'm hearing now, and Kay and Ileana and I kind of talked about this the other day, that at the federal level, there's just so much less resources in these FOIA offices that uh, it would make sense if there is a much slower response, and then if you then ended up filing a lawsuit or they didn't respond to you and you got an attorney involved, and even if it eventually went to court, it's hard to get the court or it's hard to get an office to comply even in court when there's really no one there. So it's like, who are they going to make comply with FOIA at that point? So I would start, Callie, with just a phone call and then writing your phone call, even if you left a message just saying, hey, you missed the deadline again. I gave you a call. Here's what the deadline is when I filed this request, just making as much of a paper trail as possible, so that if you do end up filing an appeal, you already kind of have that all laid out to show to someone who might be mediating it, whether it's a separate agency or a someone higher up at the agency that you filed to.
If I may ask a question,
Mhm.
recently I got a response from one of the federal agencies saying that uh, asking me which branches of their agency that I would want searched. Now, I'm not even aware of the very branches that they have. I was wondering if when I get back to them with a follow up, um, am I allowed to ask questions like, "What are your branches?" and how am I to talk to FOIA experts and go back prepared with an answer for what they seek?
Yeah, unfortunately, you are not the way that the FOIA law is written. Asking like open-ended questions is not something that they're required to answer or do as part of the FOIA process. So before you answer a question like that, I think the next best step would just be to do any sort of research you can about whether the documents that you're requesting are held within a specific agency as opposed to another, or what the best agencies to search would be, and maybe try to make that scope as tight as possible. If they gave you 5 agencies and they said, hey, do you want us to search these 3 agencies or subdepartments? Maybe picking 1 or 2 that you think are the most likely to have the documents you're looking for is probably the best route. But you wouldn't be able to say, well, thanks for the menu of options. Tell me more about what those agencies have. That would be nice, but they aren't required to answer something like that. Maybe they will. Sometimes they are helpful, especially in negotiating a way to like narrow the request. But technically, they don't have to answer any kind of other open-ended questions.
Suppose you could always FOIA the list of their branches.
Exactly. Yeah, Michelle, that is a great comment. Retention schedules are really useful. Retention schedules are basically the kind of index of how long different records are kept in an agency or different types of records. Michelle, do you want to say anything more about that?
So sometimes, not always, but sometimes, like in Texas, our retention schedules are pretty specific. So if I have a retention schedule or I go to the archives, the state archives, and I'm looking for the retention schedule, it will lead me to the agency where those are kept. That's part of the schedule. So like I was looking for homicide reports from the Department of Criminal Justice, but they were old. And so they said where they ended up being in the retention schedule. So that led me to that. And so federal wise, though, I'm not sure how helpful that would be. I don't know if those schedules would say where they are kept. But if you're having trouble researching in like ways of Google or ChatGPT or whatever, just sort of finding where they might be held, it's a possibility. I think it might be a long shot, but it could be something.
Anything else? Thank you for chiming in, Michelle. Kay, Ileana, thank you so much for joining us and telling us all about this project. Hopefully we can have you back on in 6 months or 3 months or whenever, and get some updates.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, y'all.